Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Well, at least I can say this one's going up in time this week. Things definitely cooled off in the last 7 days in the world of professional wrestling, which I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised with. WWE does WrestleMania, and by Monday night, it is right back to business as usual. Nonsensical and dumb. Although, off the record here, I did get a chance to watch that Cody Rhodes promo from Raw, and yeah, suffice to say, I think my statements about him reign true following that Seth match from night one. Cody is a much better fit in WWE than he ever was for AEW. And speaking of the world of AEW, how about Tony Khan, huh? God, you talk about the kind of blue-pilled, emotional, beta-tized personality that you just wouldn't want to spend more than 5 minutes in a room with. Tony Khan's pretty high up on that list. I'm sure you've all read the stories by now about the whole AEW bots controversy on social media and Tony's input about it in the last couple days with his whole independent study. A study, by the way, that is allegedly incomplete and has zero sources or citations behind it. So you should already know to take it with a grain of salt. All I can say about it is, apparently, I guess because I criticize AEW's product by complaining about how shitty their TV show is every week, I guess that makes me a bot, according to the experts. Because we all know to trust the experts, right? Yeah, I've been trusting the experts for the last 2 years with the bug, and look where that got us. I mean, I have a suggestion. Maybe to try to offer some general advice to Mr. Tony Khan here while he's basically looking for any excuse to reject the heavy criticisms he gets about his product. How about you write and produce a better fucking TV show consistently? You ever think about that? Try looking in the mirror and identify what the real problem is instead of trying to deflect or derive some conspiracy theory about artificially contrived accounts on social media talking negatively about your product. I don't know, maybe you try and take the negative feedback to heart and learn from it and do better, instead of pretending that everything your company does is sunshine, unicorns, and lollipops. Don't worry, we'll be getting to AEW momentarily, because I guess if I'm a bot, according to Tony's personal data collectors, I may as well embrace it. Just go all in with it at this point. Since apparently Tony's too butthurt to be a man and try to listen to people pan out with AEW's problems. Before we get there, though, make sure that if you are checking out the 5 Starr Wrestling Report podcast for the first time, that you subscribe, like the show, and leave a comment down below to share your feedback on the topics at hand today. For the Monday show, we've got AEW Rampage and NWA Powerrr on the docket today. And considering how wiped I still am from the previous weekend, we're going to keep the subject matter to 2 shows today because I don't really want to drag this one out longer than necessary. Plus, I'm kind of tired. Next week, I plan to run down the 1986 Crockett Cup as an extension of the Friday Retro Review series of NWA World Championship Wrestling. So do stay posted for that, because that'll also tie in with the regular Rampage and Powerrr report. I believe AEW has a Battle of the Belts show next weekend. To tell you the truth, after the first one I watched, which is a complete waste of an hour, I don't think I'm going to be reporting on that one. Right now, the only match they have announced for it is Thunder Rosa versus Nyla Rose, and I'll pass on that, dog. I'm good. Anyway, let's get going with Rampage here. And I'll try to start with something good here for a change, just to, appease Tony's ego. It appears that my constant complaining about underwhelming Rampage matches has caught someone's attention in management. We actually got some stars booked for this week's program. Now, yes, one of those alleged stars was Jon Moxley, but I'll at least be fair. Moxley's a much bigger star than, say, Tony Nese or QT Marshall, for example. At least this show made an effort to try and put on higher quality TV matches for a change. Now, whether or not that factored in with the execution, we'll break that down. Nevertheless, I could say that by the time the show was over, I at least had something worthwhile to discuss. So take that for what it's worth. It started with the cold open Bryan Danielson versus Trent Beretta match. I still hate the fact that this is a taped show, and probably at the top of that list of reasons is the fact that it always gives these people an excuse to cut guys' entrances. Now, mostly because they're trying to cram in too much crap into the hour. It's not even that the full entrances are a must-have for me. Because at the end of the day, the whole theme music deal with the pomp and circumstance ring intros, to me, that's not even really the problem. The problem is when they cut guys' entrances, and then they cut to the ring where there's two guys standing there, and the bell immediately rings without any pre-match context as to what's going on. It happens in almost every Rampage match, sometimes excluding the main event if they have enough time. I know it's a small detail, but, it's something that would really behoove these people to just go watch some old Mid-South or Memphis or AWA or world-class tapes back in the day and just learn how to do ring intros the right way. If you need to cut guys' entrance music and all that stuff, that's one thing. I'm fine with that. But the whole cold start thing, that always bothers me. Especially when Justin Roberts doesn't even take the time to announce the guys' names. Again, I'm just thinking from a casual fan's perspective. If I'm tuning into the show for the first time and I'm watching Rampage right at the downbeat of whatever the time it airs, 10 o'clock Eastern on Friday night, and I just see two guys wrestling in a ring and I don't know who they are or why they're wrestling, it's a problem. Now, I know there's no casual people that watch AEW, so I guess that is a null and void idea, but whatever. Trent continues to be one of the most frustrating guys on the AEW roster for me to watch. The guy can work his ass off, and I've said it before, dude. If he wasn't involved with this posse of outlaw carny goofballs, I could probably enjoy his stuff more often. Now, granted, it helps when he's also in there with a quality opponent to work with. This wasn't a remarkable 5-star classic or anything like that, but when I just see Trent go out there and wrestle, and I don't have to watch Orange Cassidy or Chucklefuck or Danhausen being dorks at ringside, it makes his stuff more watchable. A lot of the matches back and forth, and I wasn't a particular fan of everything they did in this match. I still continue to maintain that guys giving each other suplexes and throws on the outside of the ring, it should either be outlawed or, at the very least, it should be the fucking finish. Trent giving Danielson a Saito suplex on the outside, only for them to immediately have Trent run full speed into the steps less than a minute later before they cut the commercial. That shit just looks awful. If wrestling moves are supposed to matter, then someone should have the common sense to say, dropping someone on the back of their neck on the outside floor is probably going to cause more damage than running face first into the ring steps. But like I said, the guys worked hard. Anytime I get to see Danielson in a singles match, I'm immediately more intrigued than I'd be if I was watching him in there with Moxley in like a tag match or something. So, even if the match wasn't perfectly laid out, I was all right with it. We had Hook in the back eating chips and refusing to talk during an interview. And then Danhausen came out of a garbage can, and it very quickly set in that they've already ruined Hook. So the less we speak about that, the better. Sports-based wrestling, huh? Yeah, I'll bet. We had a quick top team Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti segment that also sucked. Basically, the whole thing was Sammy and Ty promising that they have something humiliating in store for Lambert, Scorpio, and Ethan Page next week. What that means, I don't know, nor do I really care. Just as long as they don't do something as generic as dropping dog shit from the ceiling of the building when they're cutting a promo in the ring. Whatever. Swerve Strickland wrestled QT Marshall. It was a dark match. Swerve won with a back heel punt kick. It happened. Oh, and it's still Swerve's house. Is it now? Willow Nightingale and Red Velvet had a tournament qualifying match. That they did. But now comes the real confliction. Main event match featuring Wheeler Yuta versus Jon Moxley. And yes, for the record, I intentionally glossed over pretty much all the junk in between that opening match and the closer, mostly because it wasn't worth my time and most of it was pure ass. So, as noted from the beginning, they got Bryan Danielson on the card, and at the end of the day, it's still Rampage. But what can you do? Anyway, Yuta and Mox in the closer here. Yuta, another guy, as a matter of fact, that I actually compare a lot to Trent. Dude can work. He's got a great look. He seems to take his wrestling seriously. And all of that only seems to matter when he's not allied with the best friends. Because I've seen several Yuta matches when he's not tied with Orange Cassidy and all that hot garbage. A couple of those matches I saw outside of AEW's product. And a lot of the stuff on his own I've thoroughly enjoyed. He's not setting the wrestling world ablaze at the moment, but the guy seems to be getting over the more and more they feature him on TV. So, evidently, with the way Tony books, he'll end up getting pulled from television in 3 weeks, and then we won't see him again for 6 months. So why am I conflicted, you ask? Well, the match had Moxley in it, for one. And as we all know now, I've kind of soured on Mox in the last year or so. When he came back from rehab, I don't know. I guess the good heart in me wanted to try and convince myself that the promo work made up for his ring work, which is garbage. But man, even listening to his promos now, it's like the only thing this guy ever seems to revert back to is something about spilling guys' guts or making them drink their own blood or something demonic and just outright goofy. I think that's the best way I can describe his promos now. They're just goofy and silly, and not in a good way. With that said, they've been really trying to run with this whole story of Yuta ditching his jobber goons to align with William Regal's Black Hole Fight Club, or whatever they're calling this thing. So I went in cautiously optimistic, despite the fact that he was wrestling Jon Moxley. And by the end, I think the best way I can summarize it is as follows. If Yuta would have had this style of match with anyone other than Moxley, I'd have probably dug it more. I wasn't the biggest fan of the blade job from Yuta, especially doing it on a tape show in a dead time slot on Friday night. I don't know, if Yuta was going to gig, do it on fucking Dynamite or something where more people are going to see it. But I can at least recognize that they had one goal with this match. They were going to do their damnedest to make Yuta as much of a valiant underdog babyface as they possibly can make him. And in that vein, I think Yuta did a really good job living up to that. Now, again, the problem here is that he was trying to feed from Jon Moxley, whose stuff looks faker than a $3 bill. And again, you can chalk that up to biased opinion all you want, but, if they wanted to book Yuta in a hard-hitting, smash-mouth, bloodbath kind of match, I'd have done this exact match with the Bryan Danielson match they did on last week's Dynamite, because at least Danielson can work and his stuff looks believable. Or B, if you absolutely had to do this match with Moxley, I'd have saved it for either a pay-per-view or, at the very least, put it on Dynamite in front of a larger audience and build up to it for a little longer. There was ebb and flow of good and bad throughout the match. I would say when Yuta was firing on Moxley and making comebacks and he was selling, most of it looked good. Yuta worked the underdog babyface role to a T. And when Moxley was in control and doing his usual herky-jerky WWE light style, it sucked. What really kind of set me off here by the end was the excessiveness of the near falls. Especially once Moxley hit Yuta with the elevated paradigm shift, the brainbuster thing he does, and then Yuta kicked out, only for Mox to then immediately put him in a submission hold for a rest stoppage. The people pop for the near falls, which is to be expected because that's the only thing people give a shit about in wrestling anymore. They've been trained to pop for the near falls, the big moves, and the finish. Everything else that happens in between is just window dressing. Clearly the crowd wanted you to win, so of course he lost. Their whole deal was trying to run with the angle of Mox being shocked that Yuta put up such a fight here, and I don't know. We've seen this story before with AEW, and a lot of the time, it's never followed up on properly. Because, what? Now Yuta's going to join Regal's group, and he's going to be another background player that doesn't stand out from the pack? At that point, you may as well just keep him with the best friends because there'd be virtually no difference in terms of card placement at that point. Going from a bit player in one group to a bit player in another group. The reason I've enjoyed Yuta's stuff in the last few weeks is for the reason that he's been standing out on his own and trying to showcase more personality as a singles guy. So I'm kind of skeptical about the whole deal. There were things to like about the match, and the story was a good idea in theory. I just would have picked a better opponent for Yuta to work with. I get he's got history with Moxley, and they did a decent job talking it up in this match here, talking about their two previous encounters. But again, the result is Yuta getting beaten with a submission hold, and it's like, even though he didn't tap, if there was a match to do a non-finish or a time limit draw or some kind of double DQ, this would have been the match to do it. At least that way Yuta wouldn't have had to take the fall and you'd have had an outing here. I don't know. The jury is still out on how much this elevates the profile of Wheeler Yuta in any way. Because I know that's going to be the common go-to analysis that people are going to use to defend this thing. But with AEW's track record, I'm more focused on fallout and follow-up. Profile elevation doesn't mean jack shit to me if the dude's still in the same spot on the card he's been in for the last 2 years. I also didn't talk about Yuta losing clean when he apparently just won the Ring of Honor Pure Championship a week ago, but I don't really feel like getting into that right now. It's dumb, but people are going to look over it because they're going to get caught up in the emotional reaction to everything that went down here. So take it for what it's worth. But I'll say this overall. Despite the steaming pile of garbage we got in the middle there after the opener and before the main event, the Trent Danielson match was good for what it was, and they had a good concept in the main event with Yuta, despite the fact that I still think Moxley's a terrible wrestler. And when you judge that by most of the Rampage shows we've seen for God knows how long, it was certainly an improvement. It's still far from a must-see show, but this is at least a closer step in that direction. Next week is the Hangman Page Adam Cole World title match, Texas Death, and I still kind of fart in that general direction. But Again, although I'm really not looking forward to that, considering how poorly that program's been booked from the start, it's still a higher profile match booked for Rampage that gives the show a reason for people to tune in. Now, why they're not doing that match on the Battle of the Belt show, which, again, I think is happening the following night, I don't know what goes on in Tony's head. Aside from bird chirping and white noise. But that's a discussion for a different day. Well, I guess I have to issue an apology out of the gate here. Last week, I had insinuated that I had zero recollection of Tim Storm ever getting physically involved with the Nick Aldis-Matt Cardona World Heavyweight title match of the Crockett Cup. Sure enough, plain as day, there's fucking Tim Storm throwing Matt Cardona back in the ring after he tried to get himself counted out. Don't know how I missed that whole thing, but mistakes happen. Granted, it was a pretty crucial angle for me to miss, but I suck. What can I say? Anyway, I mean, that pretty much dovetailed right into the Tim Storm Matt Cardona match, non-title. By the way, can anyone explain what the deal was with the geek in the full green bodysuit? What a total dweeb that guy looked like. Anyway, I touched on this in the last report, but anytime I get to see Tim Storm wrestle, hooked my interest. Granted, he's pretty limited physically with his age, but I don't know, there's a real novelty in the business now seeing someone like Tim Storm perform at a top level, even bearing in mind the fact that he's in his late 50s. Like, watching Tim Storm wrestle in comparison to watching Steve Austin at WrestleMania, like, those are two totally separate things. Because Austin's body was shot over 20 years ago, and even though he had a great showing with Kevin Owens in that match, and the same thing the following night when he stunned Vince and Theory and McAfee, the realization eventually hits in once you get past all the nostalgia stuff. It's still a pretty broken down Steve Austin. Tim Storm, on the other hand, that guy is still in peak condition. He can move well, he can take bumps. It's kind of on a similar playing field with someone like a Billy Gunn in AEW, or even a DDP. Yeah, granted, we haven't seen DDP do anything on AEW TV in like 2 years, but if Billy Gunn's wrestled on AEW recently, that guy looks incredible for his age. He can still bump and he can move just as well as he did 10 or 15 years ago. It really does kind of feel like a special attraction when you see Tim Storm work on the show. And it was a good little match. I like the deal with Cardona feigning the leg injury in the corner. And that actually looked really solid in execution on the landing, because when Cardona came down off the top rope, he actually made sure to kind of rotate his knee to the side to make it look like he legitimately tweaked it. A little bit of awkwardness there toward the finish with Tim hitting the perfect Storm on Cardona. They tried to do the deal where Storm goes for the pin, but Cardona gets his foot on the bottom rope. Problem was they did the move in the center of the ring, so Cardona had to roll himself toward the rope so he could reach out to get his foot underneath. But Cardona won after a series of running boots in the corner buckle. They did the little post-match afterbirth with Cardona trying to get the jump on Storm. But Nick Aldis came down, stomped a mud hole on Cardona in the corner, and then laid out the rest of his goon squad. It was a nice little angle. Part of me kind of wonders why they opened with this and didn't have it main event, considering it was a pretty hot angle and people stayed with it from beginning to end. Certainly better than what they ended up closing the show with, but we'll get to that. Had a nice little cheap NWA shop plug from Kyle Davis at the booth, but he was pretty quickly interrupted with a passionate Pope promo, letting us all know that certain people have been trying to issue change in the NWA. And Pope is going to make sure change comes to the NWA, because Pope is the cashier that's cashing in on his 10 pounds of gold title shot. And this was 60 seconds of epic greatness that only Pope knows how to deliver. This is the kind of guy that I know not only watched, but I guarantee you studied Classic Territory promos. This is the kind of promo that would totally fit in with any of the NWA studio shows we've been reviewing each Friday, or even a World Class or a Mid-South promo. The more I see a Pope on this show, God, the more I pray they put the world title on him. Up next, we had Darius Lockhart versus Rhett Titus in a junior heavyweight exhibition match. I already kind of talked about how good Rhett Titus is before. I love that match he had with Colby Carino at the Oak Grove Power Tapings a couple weeks back. I haven't seen much of Darius Lockhart or his work, but I don't think he was too shabby here. Looking physique-wise, he's pretty generic. Didn't really show much of anything in the personality department, but his wrestling was solid. Didn't do anything to embarrass himself. It was a very standard catch-can style match. A lot of chain wrestling, mat holds, submission work. Very status quo of, again, something you'd see on a regular studio show back in the day. Most of it looked good. There was a really bad miscue here where Rhett went for a head scissor takeover on Darius, and honestly, I don't even know what happened, but like Darius somehow didn't get a good enough rotation, and he ended up getting spiked right on top of his head. I mean, he was all right, but God, that looked brutal. But I was all right with the little DQ finish they went with here. Yeah, they worked up to it by the end there with both guys starting to lay into each other a little more, and finally Darius had Rhett in the corner. The referee counted to 5, but Darius didn't break clean, so he threw the match out and DQ'd Darius. So they'll have a nice little feud going after that. Kind of looked like he'll probably be going heel. They did a little post-match deal with him and Rhett going to the begrudging handshake, as I wrote down. So, yeah, it'll lead to a rematch. I don't know if they do that on the Power show or if they do that on the NWA USA show, but yeah, another solid little segment. We had a pretty fun little interview with Dem Boys and Mae Valentine. Briscoe's here letting us know that they're on a roll in the tag team division, but in order to cap it off, they need, as Mark referred to as here, Dem Legendary Boys. Here to issue the challenge to La Rebellion for the World Tag Titles. And that'll be a very interesting match when it goes down. Again, I have to assume the Briscoes are winning the belts. And I don't know why you would have them win the Crockett Cup and not put the belts on them. I don't know. Kind of looks like they also sort of signed off from Ring of Honor following that match with FTR. So if they are sticking around with the NWA for the time being, I'd put the straps on them. Not like La Rebellion have done anything constructive with them since they won them. Like I said, though, fun little promo. Mark Briscoe just looking totally weird, like a wild caged animal. Again, not my favorite tag team in the world, but I certainly see why Corny loves him to death. Following that, we had Chris Adonis and Jax Dane at the booth. Certainly a stark contrast to the Briscoes promo. And not in a good way. The best part of the whole segment was Dane's opening line where he told Adonis, "Let me remind you exactly who I am," to which a studio audience member yells out, "He's a furry turd." Okay, that was funny, I have to admit. Basically, Adonis issued a Master Lock challenge to Dane, but Dane declined and walked away. So I guess Adonis is a babyface now. I don't know. Nor do I care. It's Chris Adonis. He's always sucked. Trevor Murdoch killed some indie-looking dork in war paint named Garrison Creed. Just stoically walks out to the ring with fire in his eyes and kills the poor bastard with a sit-out pile driver in about a minute, if that. And then the segment became incredibly stupid, with Aaron Stevens coming out to interrupt, and I don't even know how to describe this. Well, it started off fine. Stevens coming out to basically do a stern, serious promo for a change, talking about how since Trevor lost the NWA World title, he has not returned his texts or phone calls. Says he spent Thanksgiving with him and his wife and kids, and with the old Trevor that he knows, that Trevor continues to fight and doesn't drown himself in sorrow when he loses a fight. And had they cut the segment right there, it would have been fine. Although I still would have had multiple lingering questions like, have they ever done anything on the show to establish a relationship between Trevor Murdoch and or Aaron Stevens? Maybe they are real friends in real life. I could totally buy that. But in kayfabe, as far as I know, having watched these NWA shows, I don't think I've ever seen these guys appear in the same room together, much less appearing to be friends on camera. Certainly not a Dusty Rhodes Magnum TA level friendship where we actually see them cutting promos and beating up the heels on TV. So that whole thing didn't really make any sense. What made it stupid is when Stevens randomly decided to shapeshift personalities and become the intellectual savior of the masses. I guess because he's now doing a split personality gimmick amongst the 87 other gimmicks he's portrayed on the show since he showed up 3 years ago. And I have no idea what happened here. All I know is he started singing, and I'm watching him do this with that god-awful fucking guy liner he's got on, and I just skipped ahead. I can't take anything Aaron Stevens does seriously. I tolerated his goofy stuff in WWE because at least it fit the mold, and I'll say this. I at least respected Stevens for taking all of WWE's shitty gimmick ideas and running with them, because that was a deliberate attempt at career sabotage. So in essence, I kind of felt bad for him. And he did do some pretty enjoyable stuff with that intellectual savior gimmick, the stuff he did with teaming with Cody Rhodes. And of course, once he jobbed Cena, it was all downhill. But this shit doesn't work in the NWA. It's tacky and dumb. Frankly, I was glad Trevor punched him in the mouth at the end, but God, I hope they don't feud these guys long term, because that would just be putridly bad. We had Billy Corgan address a series of topics, the likes of which included giving Rhett Titus a junior heavyweight title shot after the unsportsmanlike conduct from Darius Lockhart earlier in the program. He then said that he cannot grant Nick Aldis another shot at the world title, given that there are other contenders that are in line next. Nate said he's going to figure out when to book Trevor and Pope for their world title opportunities. And yes, he actually did use the term book, which perturbed me. But that was pretty much the extent of that. I did kind of wonder why he just blew off the Nick Aldis situation, given the fact that Aldis was basically fucked out of the belt at the pay-per-view. I mean, figuring Corgan had actually watched that match, like, he should at least have the common decency to grant Aldis at least one more shot before Pope or Murdoch. I don't know, maybe tie in a stip or something that if Aldis doesn't win, he can't get another title shot for the remainder of 2022 or something. I don't know, just my lizard brain talking. Ignore me. And our main event is the Tyrus Slam Challenge, where if Cyan is able to slam Tyrus, he earns himself a World's Television Championship match. And Austin Idol basically laid out the gauntlet, said Cyan gets 3 attempts, and if he can't do it, he's SOL, basically. So I talked about how I probably would have closed the show with the Cardona Storm match instead of this, and given the execution of how they did this, I definitely stand by that. It was an interesting little concept, and I get the idea of what they were going for. What happens is, Cyan gets the 2 failed attempts of trying to body slam Tyrus, and on the 3rd attempt, Austin Idol lures Cyan over to ringside to whisper something in his ear, and Cyan sells this by immediately expressing dejection and grief. And while he's leaning his head up against the corner turnbuckle, Tyrus shoves Robert King to the side so that he can jump Cyan and lay him out. So, well, then the match just kind of ends with a non-finish. And now we are left with a lingering question of what it was that Idol said to Cyan that apparently set him into a pit of despair. Perhaps we will come to find out that Austin Idol has been fucking Cyan's wife behind his back. Or maybe Idol body shamed him. Who knows? It's 2022. People get triggered by anything. Maybe Idol used the wrong pronouns or something. Regardless, I would not have closed the show with this. I don't know, it just felt like such a flat ending to end the show on. And like I said, they had a perfect segment with that opener that they could have easily just flip-flopped it with the main event. Like, this angle could have just been done in the middle of the show. Nitpicks of the show, structure aside, it was a fine little episode. I think I'm going forward, I'm just going to start tagging these shows by season instead of trying to come up with a date because, well, I always watch these shows on delay. And since they air them on different platforms on different days, like, I can never tell if I'm getting the right date or not with the times the shows come out. At least when I get the seasonal reference, I know it'll make it easier to follow in the archive. But looking back through my notes here real briefly, just skimming through, the opening segment was very good. I liked the Titus Lockhart match. The Trevor Murdoch and Pope stuff was good, minus the Aaron Stevens involvement, which is wretchedly bad. And the Tyrus Slam challenge was a fine little angle, but kind of a flatline payoff. But it's a cool little story they're running with the Scion thing. If they end up having him unmasked down the line, it'll be interesting to see who it actually is. I don't know if that's their goal or their game plan or whatever, but we'll see. Anyhow, that'll close out this episode of the FSWR podcast. Again, come back and check out the show each Friday and Monday. We are here on YouTube and Rumble. Links in the description for easy access. We'll be back on Friday for the Dynamite Report, as well as the continuation of our Retro Review series. Take care, all. Thanks for watching. Peace.